Greetings, Commanders, Cerebrates, and Executors. The subject of this episode is transports, overlords, shuttles, and dropships, the units that can pick up ground units and move them around. So the overlord is the Zerg transport. If I select an overlord, you'll notice that there are no commands or buttons that I can use to load ground units into an overlord. That's because in order to make an overlord able to transport things, you need to research the Ventral Sax upgrade, which comes on the lair. So I'm just going to leave that researching while we start talking about Protoss and Terran transports. The Protoss transport is the shuttle. Now, all the transports across the different races each have 8 slots for things they can carry. If I select 8 probes and load them into the shuttle, you can see there are 8 slots in the shuttle. I can't fit any more units than this into the shuttle. But the 8 slots are only enough to hold 8 units if you are putting units that only take 1 slot each into the transport. Some units take more than 1 slot each. If I load the shuttle full of zealots, each zealot takes 2 slots, so I can only have 4 zealots in the shuttle. And Reavers take up 4 slots each. I can only have 2 Reavers in the shuttle. Dragoons also take up 4 slots each, 2 Dragoons only per shuttle. There are no units in the game that take up 8 slots each. As Terran, for instance, the SCV and the Marine take up 1 slot each. Vulture takes up 2 slots, Siege Tank takes up 4 slots, and you can see I can load all those units into the dropship at once, and they're each taking up different amounts of space. This principle is the same across all 3 races' transport units. So I've been loading units into these transports already, but let's talk about the mechanics of what you can do with loading units into transports. There are 3 ways you can go about loading a unit into a transport. The first is, select your transport, left-click this load button, and then left-click a unit in the game. The transport moves over to that unit and picks it up, and now that probe is inside the shuttle. That's the first possibility. The second possibility is simply right-click your transport on a unit. If I right-click, the shuttle picks up that zealot I right-clicked on. This works just the same way as using the load command, but you don't have to press the L button on your keyboard or left-click down here. You can just right-click, it's faster. Same way right-clicking to move your units around is faster than directly invoking the move command from the command card. The third option is select some units, some ground units that you want in your transport, and right-click on the transport. If I right-click, then those Dragoons move towards the shuttle, and the shuttle moves towards the Dragoons, and they keep working on that until all the units who right-clicked on the shuttle are inside the shuttle. This last way, selecting units and right-clicking on the transport you want them in, is by far the fastest and easiest way to do it. Because using the load command on a transport, or right-clicking the transport onto units, requires you to wait until that unit is in the transport, and then right-click on another unit, and then right-click on another unit, and then right-click on another unit. You have to manually click every single unit you want the transport to pick up. It's very inefficient when you want to load a lot of units into transports. But if you want to load a lot of units into transports quickly, and you can just select those units and click on the transport, it's much faster. There are fewer clicks overall. You don't have to wait for it to happen. The units will try to figure out how to get to the transport on their own. The Overlord has finished its Ventral Sax upgrade. Now, this upgrade applies to all Overlords. Like all upgrades, once it activates, it applies to everything that the upgrade's relevant to. So now all my Overlords can pick up units with the load command. Or, if I select a bunch of Zerglings, right-click them on the Overlord, all 8 Zerglings get into the Overlord. Same as shuttles, same as dropships, Overlords have 8 slots to hold units in. Hydralisks take up 2 slots, Ultralisks take up 4 slots. There are other examples. But there are no units in the game that take up all 8 slots. There's no unit in the game that requires the entire capacity of a transport to hold just 1 unit. Just as there are many different ways of telling units to load into a transport, there are several ways you can tell units to unload from a transport. The most obvious one is the Unload All button on the command card. If I left-click this and left-click on the ground, the Overlord or transport heads to that position that I targeted and starts unloading everything that's inside it once it gets there. Now, there's no right-click equivalent for this. There's no, if you right-click your transport on a particular spot on the ground, it'll unload there. If you right-click a transport on the ground, it just moves the transport to that location. So you have to left-click the Unload All button, or use the hotkey, U, in this case, and click on the ground to actually make it unload all these things. But that's only one way of unloading. There are two more. The next option is to left-click on particular units inside the transport. So if I left-click on this Zergling, it unloads. If I left-click on this Zergling, it unloads. It doesn't look like I'm targeting specific Zerglings because the Overlord is full of Zerglings, there's nothing else in it. You can't clearly tell that I was choosing which unit I would unload. Do we still have that dropship full of units? No, we don't. Okay, let's load it. Okay. So, here we have a dropship with 4 different units in it, and I can left-click on the Vulture and unload the Vulture in particular. I can left-click on the Marine. I can left-click on the Siege Tank. So by left-clicking on the wireframe of a particular unit in a transport, you can choose which unit you want to unload at which time. So that's particularly useful because it lets you pick what you're unloading when. If you just use an unload all command, then the units will unload from the transport in the order they loaded into the transport.
Hang on, we're in for some job.
The disadvantage, the big disadvantage of using this... The big disadvantage of trying to left-click on a particular unit in the wireframe is, one, it requires a lot of clicks. You've got to click on every single unit you want unloaded. Once you click on one unit, the dropship won't continue to unload the others. You have to manually click every unit in the wireframe. The other problem with it is when you have multiple dropships selected, you can't do it. It doesn't work. You can't see the set of all the things you have loaded up when you have 3 dropships selected at once. You have to select just one and start clicking the units inside that dropship. So, clicking on the wireframes gives you the most control, but it's also the most clunky and requires the most work. There is a third option for unloading units from a transport, and that is you click Unload All, or use the hotkey, and then instead of clicking on the ground, you click on the transport itself. And the transport will unload those units. So why would you want to do that? Why would you not want to use Unload All and target the ground? Unload All, target the ground is really simpler in a lot of ways, especially because it does work if you have multiple different transports selected at once. I've got 3 transports, Unload All, here, they're all going to head to that position, they're all going to start trying to unload. They might run into some trouble because there's not too much space, since they're all trying to unload in the same position. Actually, they didn't, they unloaded everything. Whereas, if you want to use Unload All and try to... If you use Unload All and click on a particular unit, you've got to click on each of these guys individually. Okay, so why would I want to do this? Well, this is important. Unload All and click on the transport is useful because of a specific feature of how unloading transports works. And I'm going to use... I think the shuttle is the best choice for this. I'm pretty sure these are speed shuttles. Yeah, those are speed shuttles. Okay, good. So they'll most clearly demonstrate it. If you have watched the video where I talked about movement, you'll remember that I discussed flying units accelerate and decelerate. Flying units have a maximum speed. When they're stationary, they're not moving. When you tell them to move, they have to accelerate up to their maximum speed. Eventually, they reach maximum speed. You can see this is pretty fast. The shuttle's maximum speed with its speed upgrade is quite fast. And then, when they reach the destination you told them to get to, they slow down so as to stop at that destination. This is also what a transport does if you use Unload All and target the ground. The shuttle has to speed up, it gets up to full speed, and it gets close to the target, and it slows down. And only when it gets to the target, as it slows down, does it begin unloading. the shuttle spends some time slowing down before it unloads. And the other transports do the same thing. It's just less visible with them because shuttles have a higher maximum speed. So if you are trying to use a transport to get units into an enemy base, and that's a defended position, there's enemy units shooting at you as you fly in, those extra seconds that it takes for your transport to slow down before it unloads might get your transport killed. That's potentially a serious problem. Whereas, if you do not use unload all and click on the ground, if you instead fly your transport in, use unload all and click on the transport begins unloading right away. It does slow down, it does decelerate, it does begin decelerating when you use the unload all command, but it starts unloading right away, so you can get your units into the enemy, so your units are much more likely to actually land inside the enemy base before the transport dies. Also, as you notice, these units are kind of spread out. That's helpful, because if you've got a lot of units, and your transport is trying to unload all of those units all at once, and if you've got lots of transports trying to unload all the units all at once, then you can run into trouble where your transports, if you'd used unload all and clicked on the ground, they're all trying to unload in the same position. You can have problems where they don't have enough room to unload all the units. I don't think we'll have that problem here because there's not that many units in these shuttles. No. But you can run into trouble where there's not enough room to unload all the units you've got. Whereas if you use unload all and click on each of your transports, then you can get those units spread out because the transports start unloading the units right away, but keep moving forwards as they're unloading, so they spread the units out more, so you're not going to have as much of a problem with running out of space to drop units. And you can see I've got all these units I'm unloading spread out through the base. The problem with this option is it gets kind of tricky to execute. As you saw there, I had to select each shuttle individually and click unload all, click on the shuttle, and do that for each of the shuttles, and there were only 4 shuttles. That's not that many, really. This is difficult to execute well, but it's generally the best option if you're dropping aggressively into an enemy base. Using unload all and clicking on the ground is usually the best option if you are just moving units around and the place you're sending them to isn't hostile. And clicking on the wireframe inside the shuttle is usually best if you need to really correctly control something. That's what you normally use if you had only a single shuttle with some very important units and you're trying to harass the enemy with them, something like that. So there's a lot of options for how you can handle transports.